And welcome back into another NASCAR betting podcast with the NASCAR visionary, Jeff Wiandro, and myself. I'm Ed Lane. Fast Lane. Ed Lane is where you can find me, and of course, NASCAR visionary for Jeff Wiandro. This week, we look ahead to the Coke 600 Sunday evening, 6:23 p.m. Eastern, 3:23 p.m. Pacific. That's when the green flag drops from Charlotte Motor Speedway. And Jeff, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you again. Another week, another race where there is not just qualifying, but also practice, which certainly brings music to your ears, not to mention a chance to digest some information before we look at what will happen before Sunday's race.
Ed, it sure does. And it's great to be on with you from the left coast out to Virginia. It really is a treat to have a practice session this weekend for the Coke 600. And I think that, it's kind of one of those things where I think, we all get, oh, there's practice. What an anomaly this year. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. I think that this practice data might get just a tad bit overused, and there might be some value on the other side.
You bring that up. That's a fascinating point. There is practice data, but you mentioned the overuse part of it. How much of that's people maybe eager to incorporate that data into their handicapping, but maybe not considering that some of that data, and most of it, is when some of the race will take place when it's daylight, but very little of it is from nighttime, which is when the race wraps up.
Yeah, I think it could be overused by the bettors, and I think it could be overused by the sports books as well. We had a 50-minute practice session, and this is the longest race of the year, 400 laps or 600 miles. And that practice session really only encompasses a slight portion of what the race will be. And you're talking about, a 2-day difference as well. So the ambient temperature could be vastly different, even at the same time that practice occurred, which of course would affect the track temperature, which would of course affect the way the car's behavior is. We saw Larson just dominant in practice, wonderful practice session, looked great. I think that's excellent data, but I'm not exactly sure that, that data carries him through for an entire race.
Well, it's interesting because you got a handful of different bets that you gave out on VSiN's a numbers game with Jonathan Von Tovel, who's filling in for Gil Alexander. And you did that on Friday, Friday, May the 29th, heading into the event, Friday, May the 28th, heading into the event in Charlotte. And some of that incorporates Martin Truex Jr. 7-1 odds. Good for you for finding him there at the Circa Sportsbook. We can get why you like Circa in a moment. But he's shown a propensity. Maybe not great at the start of races, and he hasn't been off the charts in practice and qualifying, but he has a history of finishing well and performing well, especially at tracks once the sun sets, which is usually the most important time because that's when the race wraps up. How much of that has gone into your handicapping and your subsequent desire to take him at that wonderful number?
Well, I think you got to look at Truex and his ability to, get up on these 1.5 mile tracks. He's been very good at that for a number of years now. He's definitely running with one of the best teams. And I like the way Truex, the way they transition from day to night, beginning to end. You're right. He's not always, he might be in 13th, 14th in the mid part of a race or even toward the beginning of the race. And then we see him move right up, late in the race. He's one of those guys that's there. We've seen Kyle Busch do that. We see a number of the great drivers do that. But I think, you really got to look at just Truex's ability to make those gains. And we've got an extra pit stop this week, at least one more. The nighttime could be the right time for Martin Truex, as Darrell Waltrip used to say.
It's funny because you bring up the analogy of the extra pit stop. It's 4 stages, 100 laps for each of those, or 100 laps for each of those stages in the Coke 600. 6:23 p.m. Eastern, 3:23 p.m. Pacific time is when the green flag drops Sunday night from Charlotte Motor Speedway. What factor does that go into your handicapping, the extra pit stops, and therefore your ability to gauge who's done particularly well and consistently well on pit road?
Well, I think this is, long story short, I think most weeks we have about 12 to 14 guys that have a chance to a legitimate chance to win the race. I think this week it pairs down to about 9 to 11. And that extra 100 miles directly correlates to that number being lower. You've got at least 1 to 2 extra pit stops, depending where the cycle is prior to the 500 miles going into the 600 mile. We've seen the Hendrick cars so strong, especially Bowman on pit row, he has the fastest pit aggregate times. In other words, his pit crew has been the best, in terms of all the cars on the circuit. And you still have to get the car on and off pit row, but having a fast crew is a damn good place to start. Okay. And we look at Bowman, we look at Byron, we look at all the Hendrick cars, and we see a top flight team who typically doesn't set their driver back on pit row. We see him move up, and we see him come out in good spots. And I think when you add at least 1 to 2 more extra pit stops, another 100 miles, I think that there's extra value in a team that is solid on pit row and has a tendency to show up late.
Two of your initial bets from Friday's edition of A Numbers Game with Gil Alexander, although it's Jonathan Von Tobel filling in for him this past week on the VSiN show, involved Martin Truex Jr. The others over Kyle Busch at -110. Martin Truex Jr. was at the Westgate. But you mentioned the other two being Hendrick Motorsports, and they've been exceptional on pit road as well. The Alex Bowman stop at Dover basically won in the race, and everyone admitted that in the Hendrick camp when they finished 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's been a key element to it as well. Is it Hendrick, the team? Is it one particular driver? How do you analyze the success of their organization? Because obviously they're a key component of your menu entering the Coke 600.
Well, I think you've got to look at all 4 teams in a silo, and basically sort of, gauge them from there, especially when it comes to pit times. So I think you look at all 4 teams and kind of rate them, and they get a score for that category. But then you've got a broad overall Hendrick performance score, which is very high. So depending what you're looking at, it's either subdivided in its own category or it's part of the greater team umbrella. And I think that's where you go to start handicapping these guys one by one, and then the team completely.
When you mentioned that as well, you got William Byron at 16-1 at BetMGM, and you got Alex Bowman at 18-1 at the Westgate. And we don't know exactly yet, as we record this on Saturday afternoon, how those numbers are going to be impacted once the data is crunched. But the potential for adjustments or over adjustments in those numbers, given how they performed in practice and qualifying, at what point do you kind of say, all right, I'm satisfied with the number that I got? At what point do you say it may have moved a little bit, but it's still worth jumping on that particular driver?
Well, I think the higher the odds go, in other words, if somebody's 30-1 and you're looking at a long shot, and maybe you got them at 32 and maybe they're down to 28, that's still, you're still okay. You're in the ballpark. But if somebody is 7-1 and they go to 5.5-1, that's a very different movement. So you're much more conservative when it comes to favorites as opposed to long shots.
And also, what's notable about your selection of items and selection of picks that you've got entering qualifying and practice from this week? Martin Truex Jr. 7-5-1, 7.5-1 odds, so plus 750 at Circa Sports. Alex Bowman 18-1 odds. That's at the Westgate, along with Truex over Kyle Busch. Truex -110, also at the Westgate. And then we mentioned William Byron. He's at 16-1 odds at BetMGM. 4 plays, 3 different sports books. Once again, the value of shopping for the best line.
Yeah, and that's such a key to NASCAR. We could talk a lot about betting other sports, and I know you and I have, but when it comes to shopping NASCAR lines, there is no better sport. We will also examine offshore books tonight and going into tomorrow and to see what's out there. And I can just about guarantee you that we're going to find 5 or 6 different prices across the board between Vegas, New Jersey, and offshore.
That's crazy to think, because for other sports, and the NFL, I'll use them as an example, the week 1 lines, and they came out a couple weeks ago and things have settled down a lot right now, but by and large, they look very similar in every single sports book. Whereas NASCAR, even with additional data points to move the line in your favor or away from it, or to react properly or overreact, there's still, even up till race day, seems like there's a wide variance.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. And again, that's one of the great reasons to bet NASCAR compared to other sports. A line for the NFL will be at 4.5, and it may move all the way to 4 or up to 5 over the course of a week, but it's going to be tightly scrutinized. NASCAR just isn't that way.
Special NASCAR betting podcast as we look ahead to the Coke 600 with the NASCAR Visionary. That's his Twitter handle, NASCAR Visionary. Mine's Fast Lane Ed Lane, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and it's Jeff Wiandro. stopping by with us. 6:23 p.m. Eastern, 3:23 a.m. Pacific is when the green flag flies Sunday evening from Charlotte Motor Speedway for the Coke 600. We touched on your 4 plays entering the upcoming event. Martin Truex Jr., 7.5 to 1 odds, plus 750 at Circa. William Byron, 16 to 1, or Alex Bowman at 18 to 1. Byron, BetMGM, Bowman at the Westgate, and then Martin Truex Jr. at minus 110 over Kyle Busch. That also is at the Westgate. Have you had a chance to look over practice and qualifying? I know you're not big on overreacting. At what point will you, though, look at the lines again and re-review them to decide, I may add some plays? And a little shameless plug for you, for folks to check out NASCAR Visionary on Twitter in case there are any late additions.
Yeah, we'll definitely look at that over the course of the rest of the afternoon and into tomorrow. And with the wide availability of seeing matchups that will now be added, because the sports books know where they're going to be, where they've qualified, they have all the data too. They're going to add picks that weren't available prior to the weekend getting started. So I think there's a great opportunity that other plays will be added, specifically matchups that haven't made the top 20 board yet. I think those are where there's some real sharp angles when you start to look at matchups of the Chris Buescher versus Darrell Wallace Jr. That was not available at Circa. It wasn't available at Westgate going into the weekend. But as all the data gets, fleshed out, those things will become available at some sports books.
Well, if you're looking for maybe an additional bit of insight and analysis, certainly plenty all the time when it comes to NASCAR, just go ahead and subscribe to not only the Fast Lane with Ed Lane podcast, where we keep you updated on these types of things, but also check out NASCAR Visionary on Twitter and Fast Lane Ed Lane Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Jeff, a pleasure to speak with you again to preview Charlotte, and we look forward to having more races on the horizon where we can preview and get your insight and analysis to share with those that are coming into the exciting world of NASCAR betting.
Absolutely, Ed. It's a vast world, and I encourage sports bettors and NASCAR fans alike to take a look at their sport and see what it has to offer on the betting board.